The auctioneer's hammer fell with a finality that echoed through the dusty livestock barn, and Magnolia Winters couldn't believe what she'd just done. $2,300, nearly half her emergency fund, for a horse that looked like death warmed over, going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the blue flannel. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the sparse crowd, most of whom had been snickering at the pathetic creature in the ring. The horse stood with his head hanging low, ribs visible through a dull coat that might have once been chestnut but now appeared the color of old rust. His mane was matted, his hooves overgrown, and one eye seemed clouded with age or injury. The nameplate on his stall read Tempest, but he looked anything but stormy, more like the calm after devastation had swept through. Magnolia's neighbor, Cordelia May, elbowed her sharply. "Maggie, what in tarnation possessed you? That horse ain't got but a few good months left in him." But Magnolia had seen something others hadn't. When Tempest had lifted his head during the bidding, his good eye had locked onto hers with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. It wasn't the vacant stare of a broken-down nag. It was the gaze of someone who understood far more than anyone suspected. "Sometimes we don't choose our burdens, Cordelia. Sometimes they choose us," Magnolia replied, pulling her worn checkbook from her jacket pocket. The paperwork took an hour to complete. Previous owner, Beaumont Ranch, liquidating assets after bankruptcy. Age, listed as approximately 15-18 years. Health records, minimal, mostly vaccination dates that stopped 3 years ago. As Magnolia signed the transfer documents, the seller, a nervous man named Quincy Beaumont Jr., kept wringing his hands. "Ma'am, I feel obligated to tell you that horse, he's got some peculiar habits. Nothing dangerous, mind you, but—" He trailed off, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. "My daddy always said there was something different about Tempest. Found him as a colt, wandering, alone up on Thunder Ridge. No brand, no owner ever came forward." "Different how?" Magnolia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Quincy shifted uncomfortably. "Well, he never did take to being ridden proper. But strangest thing, sometimes at night, you'd find him standing at the fence line, still as a statue, like he was waiting for something. And during thunderstorms," he shook his head, "during storms he'd get this look in his eyes like he was listening to something none of the rest of us could hear." Loading Tempest into her trailer proved surprisingly easy, despite his apparent frailty. He walked up the ramp with dignity, as if he understood this was a rescue rather than another transaction. The drive back to Magnolia's small farm outside Millbrook took 40 minutes, during which she found herself glancing in the rearview mirror more than usual, checking on her unexpected passenger. Her property wasn't much, 37 acres of rolling pasture, a modest farmhouse her grandmother had left her, and a small barn that had seen better decades. But it was peaceful, and after her husband Jasper's death 2 years prior, peace was exactly what Magnolia needed. As she backed the trailer up to the barn, storm clouds began gathering on the horizon. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the valley just as she lowered the trailer ramp. That's when something extraordinary happened. Tempest's head shot up, his ears pricked forward, and his clouded eye cleared completely. For a moment he looked like an entirely different animal, alert, powerful, almost majestic. He stepped out of the trailer with newfound purpose, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. Another thunder rumble echoed across the sky, and Tempest nickered softly, as if answering a call only he could hear. 3 weeks into caring for Tempest, Magnolia had established what she thought was a comfortable routine. Morning grain, afternoon hay, evening brushing sessions that were slowly revealing. A coat with more luster than she'd initially expected. The horse had gained some weight, and his movements seemed less labored, though he still favored his left front hoof. But the oddities Quincy had mentioned were becoming impossible to ignore. Every morning, Magnolia found Tempest standing in the exact same spot in his paddock, the highest point, facing northeast toward Thunder Ridge. Not grazing, not moving, just standing like a sentinel watching for something on the distant mountain. When she approached with his grain bucket, he would acknowledge her presence with a gentle nicker, but his attention always returned to that ridge. Dr. Hadley Crimmins, the local veterinarian, had been out twice to examine Tempest. The first visit yielded puzzling results. The horse appeared healthier than his appearance suggested, with strong vital signs and surprisingly good muscle tone beneath his thin frame. The clouded eye that had concerned Magnolia turned out to be a superficial scar, not the serious injury she'd feared. His teeth tell me he's older than listed, probably closer to 25, Dr. Crimmins had said, running weathered hands along Tempest's neck. But his heart sounds like a 10-year-old's. Strangest thing I've seen in 30 years of practice. The second visit came after what Magnolia privately called the lightning incident. She'd been awakened at 2 in the morning by a thunderstorm that seemed to park itself directly over her property. Rain lashed against her bedroom windows, while thunder shook the farmhouse to its foundation. Worried about Tempest, she'd thrown on her rain slicker and boots to check on him. What she found defied explanation. Tempest stood in the center of his paddock, completely motionless despite the torrential downpour. Lightning illuminated the sky, in brilliant flashes, and with each strike, the horse's coat seemed to shimmer with an almost metallic sheen. His mane and tail, usually tangled and dull, appeared to move independently of the wind, flowing like liquid mercury in the intermittent light. Most unsettling of all, he didn't seem wet despite standing in the storm for what must have been hours. When the lightning ceased and normal rain returned, Tempest shook himself once and walked calmly to the shelter of the barn, leaving Magnolia standing in the mud, questioning her own eyes. Dr. Crimmins had listened to her account with professional skepticism. Static electricity can do strange things during storms, Magnolia. Horsehair can trap electrical charges, create unusual visual effects. Nothing to worry about. But Magnolia noticed he avoided looking directly at Tempest during that second examination. The neighbors began talking. Cordelia May mentioned seeing strange lights in Magnolia's pasture during late-night storms. Beauregard Finch, whose property bordered hers to the west, claimed his cattle became agitated whenever thunder rolled in from the direction of her farm. Even the mail carrier, a practical woman named Valencia Suarez, mentioned that Tempest always seemed to know she was coming long before her truck appeared on the drive. "That horse watches me from half a mile away," Valencia told Magnolia one afternoon. "My own horse at home don't even notice me until I'm rattling grain in his bucket. But Tempest there, he tracks me like he's expecting something important." The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Magnolia was in the barn organizing feed when she heard an unfamiliar sound, a low melodic humming that seemed to vibrate through the wooden walls. Following the sound, she discovered Tempest standing in his stall, head raised, producing the haunting melody. It wasn't like any horse sound she'd ever heard. The humming had an almost musical quality, rising and falling in complex patterns that reminded her of wind chimes or distant church bells. As she listened, mesmerized, Tempest's eyes began to glow with a soft, silver light. The humming continued for nearly 10 minutes before gradually fading. When it stopped, Tempest looked at her directly, and Magnolia could swear she saw something like recognition in his gaze. Not the simple acknowledgement of a horse knowing its caretaker, but the deeper recognition of one intelligent being greeting another. That night, she called her sister Persephone in Colorado, the only family member who'd ever taken her flights of fancy seriously. "Percy," she said, settling into her kitchen chair with a cup of chamomile tea, "I think I've gotten myself into something bigger than I bargained for." Magnolia spent the next morning researching everything she could find about Thunder Ridge, a task that proved more challenging than expected. The local library's historical section contained surprisingly little information about the mountain that dominated their valley's eastern skyline. What she did find made her more curious than ever. According to a 1952 geological survey, Thunder Ridge contained unusual mineral deposits that interfered with compass readings and radio signals. A brief mention in a 1960s folklore collection described it as a place where the old ones gathered when the world was young, though the author provided no sources for this claim. Most intriguingly, She discovered a newspaper clipping from 1987 about unexplained lights seen on the ridge during thunderstorms. Lights that the National Weather Service had dismissed as atmospheric anomalies. Librarian Temperance Gilroy, who'd worked at the Millbrook Public Library for 43 years, pulled Magnolia aside as she prepared to leave. "You're asking about Thunder Ridge because of that horse you bought, aren't you?" Temperance's voice was barely above a whisper. Magnolia nodded, surprised by the woman's directness. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that mountain. Said it was sacred ground, a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Course, most folks thought she was just repeating old Cherokee legends, but..." Temperance glanced around the empty library. She always claimed there were guardians up there, watching over something precious. Guardians that could take different forms when needed. The conversation left Magnolia with more questions than answers, but it also provided her first real clue. That evening, she decided to test a theory that had been forming in her mind. Instead of bringing Tempest's dinner to his stall as usual, she carried the grain bucket to the far corner of his paddock, the spot where he spent his mornings gazing toward Thunder Ridge. As expected, he followed her there, but instead of eating immediately, he stood looking up at the mountain. "What are you watching for, boy?" she asked softly. Tempest turned to look at her, and she could have sworn she saw something like sadness in his expression. He nuzzled her shoulder gently, then returned his attention to the ridge. That's when Magnolia noticed something she'd missed before. From this particular vantage point, the summit of Thunder Ridge was perfectly framed between two ancient oak trees on her property. The alignment was so precise it couldn't be coincidental. Over the following days, she began observing Tempest more systematically, keeping a notebook of his behaviors and any corresponding weather patterns or celestial events. What emerged was a clear pattern. His alertness increased during storms, new moons, and whenever the wind came from the northeast. The humming occurred every Tuesday and Friday evening, always lasting between 8 and 12 minutes. And without fail, he spent his mornings in that precise spot where Thunder Ridge was perfectly visible. The breakthrough came during a fierce storm on Halloween night. Magnolia had been monitoring Tempest from her kitchen window when the most brilliant lightning she'd ever seen split the sky above Thunder Ridge. In that instant of illumination, she saw something that made her heart race. There were lights on the mountain, not the random flicker of atmospheric discharge, but organized, patterns of illumination that pulsed like a beacon. And in her paddock, Tempest was responding, his coat shimmering with that same ethereal glow she'd witnessed before. Without thinking, Magnolia grabbed her rain gear and flashlight and headed outside. As she approached Tempest, she realized the humming had begun again, but this time it was different, more urgent, more complex. The melody seemed to be building towards something, rising in pitch and intensity. The lights on Thunder Ridge pulsed brighter, and Tempest's humming reached a crescendo. Then, in a moment that would change everything, Magnolia heard something impossible. Another voice was humming back. The answering melody came from the direction of the mountain, carried on the storm wind with crystalline clarity. It harmonized with Tempest's song, creating a hauntingly beautiful duet that made Magnolia's skin tingle with electricity, both literal and metaphorical. As the two melodies intertwined, images began flashing through Magnolia's mind. Vast forests under starlit skies, beings of light moving through ancient groves, and a sense of profound loss and longing that brought tears to her eyes. She understood with sudden clarity that she was witnessing something far older and more significant than she'd ever imagined. When the storm passed and the singing faded, Tempest turned to her with eyes that held depths of wisdom and sorrow. For the first time since she'd brought him home, he approached her voluntarily, resting his great head against her chest, as if drawing comfort from her presence. "You're not really a horse, are you?" she whispered into his mane. His response was a gentle nicker that sounded almost like agreement. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Magnolia was mucking out Tempest's stall when a sleek black sedan pulled into her drive, looking distinctly out of place among the rural surroundings. The woman who emerged was elderly but moved with surprising grace, her silver hair pulled back, in an elegant bun and her eyes the color of storm clouds. "Ms. Winters, my name is Celestine Ravencroft. I believe we need to talk about your horse." Something in the woman's tone made Magnolia's stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. She set down her pitchfork and wiped her hands on her jeans. "What about him? May I see him first?" Magnolia led Celestine to the paddock where Tempest stood in his usual morning position, gazing toward Thunder Ridge. The moment the elderly woman came into view, the horse's entire demeanor changed. His ears pricked forward, his posture straightened, and he nickered with what sounded distinctly like recognition. Celestine approached the fence slowly, speaking in a language Magnolia had never heard, melodic syllables that seemed to flow like water over stone. Tempest responded immediately, trotting to the fence with more energy than he'd shown since his arrival. The two seemed to be having a conversation, exchanging soft sounds that were clearly meaningful to both of them. "He says you've been kind." "To him," Celestine said, turning to Magnolia with a smile. "He also says you've begun to suspect the truth." "Which is?" Celestine was quiet for a long moment, studying Tempest with eyes that held deep affection. "What would you say if I told you that Tempest is approximately 300 years old, and that he's the last guardian of something ancient and precious that's hidden on Thunder Ridge?" Magnolia felt the world tilt slightly. "I'd say that explains a lot, actually. You're taking this remarkably well. Lady, after watching my horse glow during thunderstorms and sing duets with a mountain, not much is going to surprise me at this point." Celestine laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Then you're ready to hear the whole story. Tempest belongs to a race of beings your ancestors called the Tempest Keepers, elemental guardians who could take the form of horses when needed to move undetected among humans. For centuries, they protected sacred sites throughout these mountains, places where the Earth's natural energies converged." She gestured toward Thunder Ridge. "That mountain holds the last active convergence point in this region. The Tempest Keepers maintained the balance there, ensuring the energies remained stable and beneficial rather than chaotic and destructive. But as human development spread and the old beliefs faded, their numbers dwindled. And Tempest? The last of his kind, at least in this area. He's been alone for nearly 50 years, maintaining his vigil despite his isolation. The Beaumont family never understood what they had. They saw only an unusual horse that wouldn't be ridden, and displayed peculiar behaviors during storms. Magnolia looked at Tempest, who was watching their conversation with obvious interest. "But he's been responding to something on the mountain. I've seen the lights, heard the singing." Celestine's expression grew excited. "That's why I'm here. What you've witnessed isn't just Tempest maintaining old habits. It's the awakening of something new. Your presence, your kindness has given him something he'd lost, hope, and that hope has awakened others." "Others?" "Young Tempest Keepers from distant mountains, drawn by the songs you've heard. They're coming to Thunder Ridge, attracted by signals they thought had gone silent forever. Tempest's vigil is ending, Ms. Winters. His long loneliness is about to be over." The implications hit Magnolia like a thunderbolt. He's going to leave. Not leave exactly, transform, return to his true form and rejoin his kind. But Celestine paused, studying Magnolia's face. "He's grown attached to you. The bond between a Tempest Keeper and someone who truly sees them is not easily broken. He wants to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Before Celestine could answer, the air around them began to shimmer. Tempest's form wavered like a mirage, and suddenly he was no longer a horse but a being of living light and storm energy, beautiful and terrible and magnificent. His voice when he spoke was the sound of wind through mountain pines and distant thunder. "Magnolia Winters," he said, and her name sounded like music in his otherworldly voice. "You have given me the greatest gift possible. You have seen me for what I truly am, and shown me kindness without expectation of reward. Now I offer you the same gift in return." The world around them pulsed with energy, and Magnolia felt as if she stood at the threshold between two realities. "What are you offering me?" "The chance to become something more than human. To join us. As a guardian, to help us protect the sacred places and maintain the balance between worlds. You would gain long life, the ability to move between forms, and the deep connection to the Earth's energies that we possess. Magnolia's heart raced as she considered the impossible choice. Leave her human life behind for something beyond her wildest dreams, or remain earthbound while Tempest returned to his true calling. What happens if I say no? Tempest's luminous form flickered with what might have been sadness. Then I will. Treasure the time we've had together, and you will always hold a place of honor in our stories. The choice is yours, and either path leads to wonder in its own way. Magnolia stood at the crossroads between two worlds, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a cloak. The air thrummed with energy as Tempest held his luminous form, waiting patiently for her decision. Celestine watched, with knowing eyes, as if she had stood at similar crossroads herself long ago. How long do I have to decide? Magnolia asked. The conjunction occurs at midnight tomorrow, Celestine explained. When the new moon reaches its peak and the storm energies align with Thunder Ridge, the portal between worlds will open. That's when the other Tempest Keepers will arrive, and when the transformation must take place if you choose to accept it. And if I choose to remain human? Tempest's voice carried the gentleness of summer rain. Then we will part as friends, and you will keep the memories of our time together as a treasured gift. Your life will continue on its natural path, enriched by having touched the world of wonders. That evening, Magnolia sat on her porch watching Tempest, now in his horse form again, graze peacefully in the moonlight. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal after the morning's revelations. She thought about her life, about the routines that had become both comfort and prison since Jasper's death. She'd been existing rather than living, going through the motions of tending her small farm while her heart remained locked away. Tempest had changed that without her realizing it. For the first time in 2 years, she'd felt purpose, wonder, even joy. Her sister Persephone called just as the sun disappeared behind the western hills. You sound different, Maggie, Percy said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. Lighter somehow. I'm facing a big decision, Percy. Maybe the biggest of my life. Want to talk about it? Magnolia almost laughed. How could she explain that she was considering abandoning her humanity to become an elemental guardian? Let's just say I have a chance to start completely over, but it would mean leaving everything familiar behind. Honey, you've been stuck, neutral since Jasper passed. Maybe leaving the familiar behind is exactly what you need. After they hung up, Magnolia walked out to the paddock. Tempest approached the fence and she ran her fingers through his mane, marveling at how right it felt to touch this being who was so much more than he appeared. Tell me about your world, she said softly. Tempest's eyes began to glow with that familiar silver light, and suddenly Magnolia's mind filled with visions. She saw vast networks of energy flowing through the earth like luminous rivers, connecting sacred sites across continents. She witnessed the Tempest Keepers in their true forms, beings of pure elemental force working in harmony to maintain the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual realms. She experienced their deep connection to all living things, felt their joy in the changing seasons and their sorrow when sacred places were destroyed or forgotten. Most powerfully, she felt their sense of purpose, their knowledge that their work was essential to the well-being of both the seen and unseen worlds. It's beautiful, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But it's also lonely. Not anymore, Tempest replied. The others are coming, can you feel them? Magnolia concentrated, and gradually became aware of a presence at the edge of her consciousness. Multiple presences, actually, growing stronger as they approached. Young voices singing in harmony, carrying hope and excitement across the miles. They're coming for you, she realized. They're coming because of you. Tempest corrected gently. Your acceptance of me, your willingness to see beyond appearances, it created a beacon of hope that reached them across vast distances. You've already changed everything, Magnolia. Now you must decide how much more you're willing to change. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Celestine returned with information about the transformation process and what Magnolia could expect if she chose to proceed. The change would be irreversible, but not immediate. She would retain her human form most of the time, gaining the ability to shift only gradually as she learned to harness her new abilities. You'll be the first human to undergo this transformation in over 2 centuries, Celestine explained. The Tempest Keepers stopped offering the gift when humans became too focused on material concerns to understand its true value. Tempest convinced the others that you're different. As evening approached, storm clouds began gathering around Thunder Ridge despite clear weather in the surrounding areas. The wind carried distant music, the songs of approaching Tempest Keepers growing ever closer. At 11:30, Magnolia made her final preparations. She left letters for her neighbors, arrangements for her property, and a detailed note for Persephone explaining as much of the truth as she dared. Then she walked out to meet her destiny. Tempest was waiting in the paddock, no longer maintaining his horse disguise. His true form rippled with contained lightning, beautiful and awesome. Around the base of Thunder Ridge, lights were beginning to appear. Not the random flashes of electrical storms, but the purposeful illumination of beings arriving from across the continent. "Are you ready?" Celestine asked, her own form beginning to shimmer with subtle energy. Magnolia looked back at her farmhouse one last time, then at the magnificent being who had entered her life as a broken-down horse and revealed himself to be so much more. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. As midnight approached and the conjunction aligned, Magnolia stepped forward to claim her new destiny, leaving her old life behind with gratitude rather than regret. The transformation began as a tingling sensation in Magnolia's fingertips, spreading slowly up her arms like gentle electricity. Around Thunder Ridge, the assembled Tempest Keepers sang in harmonies that made the very air vibrate with power. Their lights danced across the mountainside in patterns that spoke of celebration and welcome. "Don't fight the change," Celestine advised, her own form now fully revealed as a being of swirling mist and starlight. "Let it flow through you like water finding its course." Magnolia felt her consciousness expanding, her awareness extending beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She could sense the energy networks that crisscrossed the valley, feel the pulse of life in every tree and blade of grass. The sensation was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. Tempest moved closer, his luminous presence providing an anchor point as her transformation progressed. "You're doing beautifully," he said, his voice now clearly audible in her mind. "The others are eager to meet you." As if summoned by his words, the first of the approaching Tempest Keepers crested the ridge. They came in forms that defied easy description, beings of living wind and captured lightning, of crystallized moonbeams and dancing aurora. Young by their standards but ancient by human measure, they radiated curiosity and joy as they descended toward Magnolia's property. The eldest among them, an entity that seemed to be made of condensed storm clouds, shot through with silver, approached with formal dignity. "Magnolia Winters," they said, their voice the sound of wind through canyon walls. "We greet you as sister and guardian. Your beacon of hope has called us home to a place we feared was lost forever." Magnolia found she could respond telepathically now, her thoughts taking on the musical quality of Tempest Keeper communication. "I'm honored to be welcomed among you, though I'm not sure I understand how I've helped." The young ones pressed closer, their excitement palpable. "You saw him," one of them explained, gesturing toward Tempest. "You saw through the disguise to his true nature and offered kindness without conditions. Such recognition creates resonances in the energy fields. It announces that this place is safe for our kind once again." Another added, "We had given up hope for Thunder Ridge. 50 years without contact, we assumed the convergence point had been corrupted beyond redemption. But your acceptance of our brother created a cleansing effect, purifying the energies and making them sing again." Magnolia felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she began to understand the larger implications of her simple act of compassion. "So Thunder Ridge can be properly protected again?" "More than that," Tempest said, moving to stand beside her as her transformation neared completion. "It can become a beacon itself, calling others of our kind who have been scattered and isolated. a gathering point where ancient wisdom can be shared and new guardians trained. As the conjunction reached its peak, Magnolia felt the final stage of her transformation begin. Her human form didn't disappear. Instead, it became one of two states she could choose between. She experimented tentatively, feeling her consciousness shift and expand as she took on her new elemental nature for the first time. She was herself, but more, connected to wind and water, earth and sky in ways she'd never imagined possible. The boundary between her individual self and the larger world became permeable, allowing her to experience the interconnectedness of all living things. "How do you feel?" Celestine asked with a knowing smile. "Like I've been living in a house with all the windows closed, and someone just threw them all open at once," Magnolia replied, marveling at the sensation of her awareness extending across miles of terrain. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. The Tempest Keepers shared stories of distant mountains and far-flung sacred sites, painted pictures with their songs of the vast network of guardians working to maintain balance across the world. Magnolia learned that there were others like her, humans who had been chosen for transformation over the centuries, each one adding their unique perspective to the collective wisdom of the Keepers. As the sun rose, painting Thunder Ridge in shades of gold and rose, the assembled guardians began the work of establishing their new sanctuary. Some would remain permanently, others would visit regularly, but all would contribute to rebuilding what had been lost. Tempest, no longer the last of his kind, took on the role of mentor and guide. His centuries of solitary vigilance had ended, replaced by the joy of community and shared purpose. "You gave me back my future," he told Magnolia as they watched the others organize themselves around the mountain. "Now we can give the same gift to this place." Magnolia, now Magnolia Stormweaver in the tradition of her new people, divided her time between her human form and her elemental nature. She kept her farmhouse as a base of operations, though it became a gathering place for those who needed to interact with the human world. Her neighbors noticed changes. The violent storms that had plagued the valley became gentler, more predictable. Crops grew better, wildlife flourished, and there was a sense of peace that settled over the entire region. Valencia, the mail carrier, was the first to comment. "Don't know what you've done different, Magnolia, but this whole area feels blessed somehow, like the land itself is happy." If only she knew, Magnolia thought with amusement, how right she was. Years passed, and Thunder Ridge became known throughout the hidden networks of the supernatural world as a place of sanctuary and renewal. Lost guardians found their way there. Ancient spirits discovered welcome, and the convergence point grew stronger with each passing season. Magnolia never regretted her choice. She had found not just a new life, but a new purpose that filled the emptiness Jasper's death had left behind. She was no longer just existing. She was part of something larger, more beautiful, and more important than she had ever dreamed possible. And on quiet evenings, when she stood in her pasture, still the same spot where she'd first watched Tempest gaze toward the mountain, she would smile at the memory of the broken-down horse she'd bought out of pity, never guessing he would transform her entire world. The secret had been worth keeping, and the discovery had been worth everything she'd given up to embrace it.